the body's ability to move in a wide range of motion with strength is what I define as mobility. And if you lose that ability to move, and you can be flexible, you can get down in the splits just fine, but you don't have the mobility to move into a good range of motion, that means that you lack that strength, even though you have the flexibility. And I think that's sometimes what also leads people to injury as well, is that they get really hypermobile. They're able to have too much range of motion, but not have the strength to control that range of motion.
Troy, we're going to talk back pain prevention, healing from back injuries. But first, let's get started with the wooden dummy, the Wing Chun wooden dummy that I know is behind you. So what's with the Wing Chun dummy?
Well, it's a tool, just like anything when you're training in the martial arts, just like a heavy bag, just like pad work and stuff like that. I see it as a great tool to train just kind of very basic traps and stuff like that. Whenever, as a martial artist, as we approach a clinching range, that we can really just, we brace and then we have to move around an object. A lot of times when you look at other martial artists who train this, like some of the Wing Chun practitioners, Jeet Kune Do, they want to do like 1,000, like move here, move here, move here, move here, and then I'm going to hit once. And I just see it as just a way of I get here, I got to move around, and then I clinch. And I think that just makes it a great tool in that sense, because it provides a very sturdy, kind of a sturdy body especially if you don't have anybody around, which, most of us in the past couple of years really haven't had that.
Yeah, it's funny with the whole Wing Chun in MMA thing, because the Wing Chun people, they'll analyze the whole fight, and there's be like one moment where Tony Ferguson is using a pak sao, where you slap the guy's arm out of the way while hitting him.
Yeah.
And they'll take that and they'll go, proof that Wing Chun works. And they're not wrong.
Yeah.
But that was like 1/2 second of a 15-minute fight. Yeah. And so it's this idea of staying in that range forever, and like we're gonna go back and forth.
Yeah.
That's unrealistic. Now, some people say that's just a training method. Cool.
Right.
But when I did Wing Chun, they didn't say, hey, just so you know, this is the training method. The reality is you're either gonna break distance or close distance so much faster. And you're not going to stay in that trapping range really for very long. It's going to turn into a clinching game.
Yeah.
Which doesn't mean you shouldn't work it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's more of like it's a moment in time. It's like I reach a barrier. How do I get around that barrier to keep, moving forward into my opponent? You can spend hours and hours on it to just reach that one second in a fight where it's going to do it. Is there a lot of other things that are probably better use of your time training? Absolutely. I don't think it's completely a useless point, but it's definitely, I think that when you look at other practitioners, Wing Chun being obviously the most, widely known example, but it's common in other Chinese martial arts as well, that you really should just practice kind of like the very foundational elements of it, and then move on to either striking or into a clinch grappling range.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the one time that you do sort of stay in that extended trapping range for an extended period of time is really in the ground and pound game. Because if you're on top of me and say my closed guard and you're trying to hit me, you have you can stay in that range of like where you're tying up one arm, punching me, tying up the other arm, punching me, tying up both arms, headbutting me. And although I probably shouldn't mention headbutting to a chiropractor. We'll get to
okay.
that.
I've actually used a headbutt before. It was quite an interesting thing. It was sparring. It wasn't an actual fight, but they said anything goes, and it was a Jeet Kune Do school, so anything goes. You can do groin shots, you can do headbutts and stuff like that. And we just got tied up, and I had nowhere to go. And I'm like, oh wait, they told me I could headbutt, so I went like that, and it totally kind of broke him away from me enough to like give me enough range to punch and kick and stuff like that. So it was actually pretty interesting and a lot more effective than I thought it would be.
Were you wearing helmets?
Yeah, we were wearing like regular helmets, but then they also had like a plastic face shield so that we
Oh,
didn't.
were they the cheese grater ones with the little round holes where if you punch them with your bare knuckles, you're going to come away with bleeding hands?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I might still have it somewhere. I mean, it's probably needs to be thrown out because it's not you know probably not very clean anymore.
And the plastic becomes brittle after 10 years of not use. I'm actually,
Right.
I've gotten a couple more sparring helmets in the last little while, and I'm going to start working more on the sort of the self-defense aspect of
Hmm.
martial arts and grappling again. And I'm looking forward to
Yeah,
doing some experimentation there. Just, to
yeah,
maybe make that the focus for the first half of 2022. Uh,
right.
even if it's not the focus, it's always fun to go back there. And somebody once said
Yeah,
that if something works in self-defense, it's probably going to work in sport, but it's not always the other way around. I think there's some truth to that.
yeah, it could be. It's interesting. So part of my martial arts background, I've been training. We call them the big three of the internal martial arts: Xingyi Chuan, Bagua Zhang, Tai Chi Chuan. Um, and I've been training those with Tim Cartmel, who's also you may know him, who's a third degree black belt under Kleber Luciano in Jiu Jitsu. And he spent about 10, 11 years in Taiwan and China during the 80s and 90s. And I forgot where I'm going with this, but a lot of times we've kind of, we've talked about that in terms of sport versus, self defense and stuff like that. And he's really said that if I approach it from more of a sporting aspect, the self defense stuff becomes a little bit easier for people to grasp. But if I just kind of focus on more of like self defense stuff and I tell people, oh, that's what you're doing, they tend not to get it easily enough, if that makes sense. And I think he's told a lot of his students and fighters and stuff like that, just tell people you do sports, like combat sports. You know, don't focus so much on the self defense.
I think what I meant was if you're training self-defense against resistance, right?
Hmm.
If we're rolling on the ground with strikes, the stuff
Yeah.
that I'm going to do there to not get punched in the nose is probably going to work in a sport situation. But
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
people who are training just I only train self defense, meaning I don't spar, meaning I don't
Hmm.
pressure test it.
Yeah.
They're in for a really rude awakening. How do you pressure
Oh, for
test
sure.
something like? I mean, I've seen push hands, so that's the way that you would sort of kind of pressure test Tai Chi.
Mhm.
How do you pressure test things like Xingyi and Bagua?
So with Xingyi, I mean, Xingyi is a lot of it's really just striking. It's kind of like a old school MMA without the ground. So there's striking, there's a little bit of kicking, and then there's also some knockdowns and takedowns and stuff with it. So it definitely has all that aspect in it. Now, the old school way with Xingyi was um, to drill certain kind of set patterns back and forth, because they didn't have, all the gear we did. So, they didn't want to risk getting too injured because obviously when you're injured, you can't actually use it. And a lot of these guys were like bodyguards and security detail for caravans and things like that. So they would be able to do that back and forth, back and forth back in the day without worrying about getting too injured. And if somebody messed up, then bam, you got that instruction very quickly. But obviously they still did, they still did free sparring as well because they had to train that type of stuff. And what a lot of people don't know about the Chinese martial arts is that, um, especially during the Qing Dynasty, when the Manchurians were in power, which were a steppe people from the north, um, and we can go into huge detail about this, but not to go overboard with it. The Manchurians were not necessarily related to the Han Chinese. So the Manchurians came in, they took over the failing Ming Dynasty, which was a Han Chinese dynasty, and they created the Qing Dynasty. And a lot of the steppe people from the north, like the Mongols, were very big on wrestling. Wrestling is very much that aspect of their culture, as well as things like archery and horse riding, things like that, because they were nomadic or semi-nomadic people. So a lot of martial artists, especially in northern China, would practice or train even just at a more of a hobbyist level in Shuaijiao or Chinese wrestling. It became Shuaijiao later on, but um, Chinese wrestling or Mongolian Manchurian wrestling.
Yeah, there was a podcast called Villains and Virgins podcast, which did an episode on war games as a step, and it was about the training methods
Okay.
that the Mongols essentially and the other people
Yeah.
there would use. And you're
Yeah.
exactly right. Archery, horseback riding, archery while you're riding on horseback, wrestling,
Yeah.
and then giant hunts. They would use
Yeah.
these, okay, 10,000 men, and we're going to capture and kill most of the
Yeah.
animals in this
Yeah.
area. And that's very applicable to military
Yeah.
matters as well. If it's an
Yeah.
encirclement, it's passing orders
Yeah.
around.
Yeah. Well, they said that I guess Genghis Khan, the famous Mongolian, who kind of almost took over most of the world at the time, um, he it, they would talk about how hunting would be the preparation for war, and that would be how they prepared to take over, a people or land or stuff like that. That they would use their their hunting as their war games, essentially.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. So, which martial arts have you done? And then we'll get on to the back health aspect of all this. But you've done
Right.
Tai Chi, you've done Xingyi, you've done Bagua, you've done some
Hmm.
Jiu-Jitsu,
Yeah.
you've done Jeet Kune Do.
Yeah. Yeah. I do a little bit of Bang Muay Thai currently, as well as trying to stay as steady with jujitsu as I can. Um, you know, the past couple years have been really hard to do any type of that training, and I have a good group of there's a good group of people that I train here that are pretty good about trying to stay healthy, and the owner of the school, he got vaccinated and I got vaccinated around the same time, so I was very comfortable kind of being around them, and it was definitely it was definitely good. I've also dealt with some injuries and stuff like that over the past year from being previously employed um, at the place I used to work at as a chiropractor before I decided to kind of leave that, get better, and then branch off into my own.
So you've currently got your own practice in Glendale, California, right?
Yeah, yeah, I'm slowly building up. It's taking a little bit of time, but
Well, if you can
it's
build up during these times, then
yeah,
hopefully when things get better fairly soon, it should take
yeah.
off. That's what at least people are going to hurt themselves as they start going back to jujitsu classes.
Yeah, absolutely. Sadly enough, that is my hope.
Well, so in all the martial arts training that you've done, what are kind of the most common back injuries that you've seen?
I've seen a lot of, I haven't seen too much in terms of low back. I've seen a lot more kind of neck and upper back issues that people tend to get. Um, More of it in like jujitsu tends to be, more smaller joint injuries, things like that, wrists, elbows, maybe some shoulders, but more like fingers and stuff like that. Ankles, knees. Knee injuries seem to be really common in jiu-jitsu, a lot more than I ever expected it to be.
Especially, and I'm pro leg locks and I'm pro heel hooks, but they've really taken off in the last
Yeah.
5 years, and I bet that's
Yeah.
a big contributor.
Yeah. Yeah.
You are gonna, if you train that stuff, you are eventually going to hurt yourself. Like there's just no way around it. I think you should train it and try and minimize the injury. It's not like all or nothing. It's not knee replacement versus nothing. It's a tweak versus a major injury.
Yeah, definitely. I tell people martial arts is it's a fantastic thing to train. It's a fantastic thing to do, whether you're more of a hobbyist level or you really want to do it more of a professional level. It's got 100% injury rate. It's gonna happen. The longer you're in it, the more it's gonna happen. And really, it's just making sure you're taking care of your body as much as you can, and paying attention to the health of it as much as the practice of it as well.
Putting yourself back together as much as taking other people apart.
Yeah, essentially.
So, I mean, the neck certainly does take a beating. Like, I think I know a lot of jiu-jitsu practitioners who have neck problems. I've had neck problems. I've gotten so much faster about tapping to any kind of, if it's kind of a half-assed choke, but it's bugging my neck, I'm going to tap like that. I'm just telling everybody how to beat me right now. Grab my head, twisting it, and I'll tap, and then we'll go again, and I will do my very best to not let you get my head.
Right.
Is it just all the torque? Like, what is it? Is it the compression? Is it the torquing? Is it the bending?
It's probably a little bit of all of the above. I think that just, especially the torque aspects of it, when you really torque a neck and things like that, it puts a lot of pressure on the spine. And the spine is supposed to have quite a bit of movement in terms of its overall connection to itself. But when you try to move maybe one or two or three segments on its own in a aggressive, violent way, it's probably going to cause a little bit more harm than you intended to.
So, if I understand you correctly, you're saying as opposed to like having a global twist, say where each vertebra is rotating by 5 or 10 degrees, that maybe that's too much. A couple of degrees each, that it all goes into the C3, C4, C5, and they're each doing 25 degrees.
Yeah, well, I think as we all learned in jiu-jitsu very quickly, whenever you isolate a body part from the rest of the body, that's how something, gets injured. Like if we put in like an Americana or something like that, and as it rotates back and you're isolating the shoulder or you're isolating the arm away from the rest of the torso, you're going to tap pretty quickly. So I think that when we look at the body, if it stays connected, it tends not to get injured as well. And I think that's when you get into things like functional training, stuff like that, that when you stay functional with the movement and your body's connected as a unit, it tends to not lead to injuries so quickly.
Okay. So when you say keep your body connected as a unit, what does that look like on the ground? I'm assuming with the arms, it means, don't leave your arms dangling out in space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, keeping everything kind of close and in and stuff like that, and not opening up, for something to be taken right away. Obviously, sometimes you have to do that to get out of things and to move around, stuff like that. But, if you do it in such a way where you're kind of essentially just giving it to people, then I think that's going to set yourself up for getting submitted or injured or both.
So then on a mechanistic level, and let's just go with the neck, because that's the most, like you said, and like I've seen, I think it's the most common spinal tweak that happens in a grappling context. What? So you get my head in a guillotine, and you're kind of cranking it, and I'm fighting, and then something goes right and stop. Okay, and the next day I'm walking around with an ice pack on my neck.
Yeah.
What most typically has gone wrong at a soft tissue level?
So we're probably looking at a couple things. One, there's probably a muscle spasm occurring in there, and this could be caused just because there was just so much tension in there that the muscle just couldn't take the tension anymore and just said, okay, I'm going to spasm, lock down, hold myself into this position, and protect myself from further injury. And then there's also possibly some inflammation occurring at the articular connection. So
what do you mean articular connection?
So where the joints kind of meet themselves, you know. So if you have one joint and then those joints are encapsulated, and as those joints are encapsulated, you can create an inflammation process within there. And a lot of times when that occurs, your body's going to shut down some movement in there. So, you know, I always think it's funny when people tell me, "Oh, hey, my neck's bothering me, but I think it's just a muscle thing." And I'm like, well, it probably is, but it's also probably a loss of function within the movement of that joint or that joint segment. And if we kind of reset that essentially, then that should help provide some better movement. But then at some point, we need to really start working on strengthening the area as well so that it further prevents that from happening in the future.
So let's go through that step by step. Let's just start with the acute phase. Now, like, my neck, usually it happens after class, after your adrenaline wears off and you start cooling down. You're like, oh my God, I've really overdone it. Kind of Western sports medicine would tell you put ice on it. And when I've gone to Chinese medicine practitioners, they're like, ice is only good for storing corpses. It's got to be heat. So where are you in the great east-west, hot-cold divide?
I'm probably more on the Western side, at least within the first 24 to 48 hours. I think that applying an ice pack to the area, really just to kind of calm it down, mitigate the process from, getting out of hand and allowing it to just kind of essentially cool off. And I think that if we do it that way, it'll make it easier for it to start moving a little bit better because I understand the point behind the Chinese medicine perspective of, ice equals no movement equals death. It makes sense on a surface level, but sometimes you have to calm down the initial acute inflammatory process so that your body can move a little bit and it doesn't start to restrict itself like that and allow for some sort of scar tissue to build up, things like that. And this way your body will heal a little bit faster in a better way.
I'm glad you said that because it is a confirmation. You're confirming my bias, which is use cold initially and then to bring down the swelling and then bring in heat to increase the circulation. I don't know if that's technically correct, but that's what I've been doing, and it sort of works.
Yeah. I find doing a little bit of heat if something's injured and stuff like that, and it's something I've kind of dealt with over the past couple of years for myself. Bringing some heat into the area before I do any type of exercise or movement or anything like that, gets the blood flowing, it gets moving and stuff like that. But if I do feel like there's like an acute or even a subacute inflammation occurring, I want to ice that first. And then I can either just let it cool off on its own in terms of, or, warm up naturally on its own rather. And then or just apply some heat for a very brief period of time.
Now, the next thing you mentioned was the muscle spasms around the injury and the inflammation in the articular surfaces. Which of those would you deal with next if I came to you with, my neck essentially in a brace, of my own making, and where I have to turn my whole body to do a shoulder check when I'm driving?
Yeah. I call that the shoulder whirl. It's going back and forth. But when we're looking at kind of calming down with the ice, and then afterwards, maybe I want to warm it up before I start working on, either using a joint manipulation or using, which we in chiropractic we call adjustment, or using some sort of soft tissue modality, such as Graston, or everybody loves the Theraguns nowadays. I want to kind of make sure that the tissues are as pliable as I'm going to get them. So obviously I may apply some heat to someone who came in to me with acute neck or back pain, and then start working on the soft tissues a bit. Now, if there's no severe direct trauma, like a car accident or really bad fall or anything like that, I'm not really concerned about any type of break unless they've heard like a pop or a snap or something like that. And if that is the case, then I might send them out to x-rays before I do too much to them, in terms of being a little bit more invasive with my therapy. But if I'm not worried about, any type of fracture or break, and just for your audience, a break and a fracture are the same thing. I don't know why that's such a confusing thing. When you could have different types of fractures and stuff like that, but they mean the same thing. So with that, I may send them out for x-rays if I do suspect anything like that. But if not, then
depending on how severe the injury is, I may start off with just a
soft tissue, very light, just to kind of smooth out a little bit, and then just a very light chiropractic adjustment or manipulation to the area. I have actually found people respond pretty well to adjustments, more so than I thought they would in the initial phases of an injury. I think there's always been this kind of hesitation within the chiropractic profession that if you get too quickly into the adjusting, people may have a worse spasm afterwards, and that can occur. But more often than not, people actually feel a little bit better after an initial adjustment, even if it's pretty quick. And pretty quick to when they come in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I'd say in my personal experience that's true. The one exception was the time I had a pinched nerve, and the nerve itself coming out of the neck was extremely irritated. Wow. And I was trying to get ready for the Abu Dhabi trials. So I want to say that was in 2005, 2006. Yeah. And I tried everything, like chiropractic, massage, acupuncture. Yeah. I was just really a Hail Mary in every direction because I thought it would be my last chance to compete at that level. Yeah. Every single thing I tried made it worse because that nerve just wanted to be left alone to bloody heal up. Like, I don't want to be stretched. I don't want to be adjusted. I don't want needles poking. Just leave the hell alone.
Yeah. And, and this is where I get to a point where, like, if it's that severe, I may tell a patient, look, if it's that bad, I want to refer you to your medical doctor. I'm going to have them, I want you to get a prescription of probably a non, opiate painkiller and,
anti-inflammatory?
A muscle relaxer. And, I always tell them, look, a muscle relaxer, when you take a muscle relaxer, it relaxes from the brain. So it's going to relax everything. So just kind of take it at night before you go to bed, and that way it will at least help kind of calm it down a little bit, and then we can move forward as much as we can with it. And I think that usually seems to help people. Obviously, when I tell people this, I tell it this is kind of what I would do for myself. The one thing I always bugs me about chiropractors, and it may be different depending on your state, stuff like that, or country, but chiropractors should not be prescribing or recommending medications because we do not get that type of training. We get a little bit of training in pharmacology, but they should not be, saying, "Oh, you need to take this medication or you need to take this pill or anything like that." And we're not supposed to be doing that.
Okay. Now, when you say muscle relaxant, like what's having just said that you're not supposed to be recommending it, isn't there a problem with a lot of the? I'm confusing muscle relaxants and the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories because, I don't know, ibuprofen.
Yeah, they're two separate.
Really?
Those are just they're different medications. Yeah. Muscle relaxants, it really just kind of helps to relieve tension in the soft tissues, and it works through the nervous system in the brain.
Okay.
It's not like a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. It's not like Tylenol or acetaminophen. Acetaminophen works on the pain receptors within the brain that calms down pain within the body. So when you look at muscle relaxants versus painkillers, they're two different things. You're not going to necessarily get less pain with a muscle relaxer. It's just going to help kind of calm down the nervous system and the muscle system.
And this, ladies and gentlemen, is a good example why you shouldn't go to your local jiu-jitsu black belt, even if his name is Stephan Kesting, and ask him for medical advice. Because he doesn't know the difference between a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory and a muscle relaxant. What about disc injuries? Because I know a fair number of people, not a fair number of people, I know some people who've had to have disc replacements, seemingly mostly in the neck, although I was talking to Nate Quarry the other day, and he did have a whole bunch in his back. And it seems that the actual injury to the disc is not super uncommon. It really, over time, it does seem to have the potential to wear out.
Yeah. I don't have the actual numbers on this, so don't officially quote me, but I would say that if I took 10 people from the street, maybe 8 to 9 of them will probably have some sort of disc issue if we put them under some imaging. A lot of times they are very they're found incidentally if you're looking for other things, and they may take an MRI of your back and stuff like that for something else, and they say, "Oh, look, you actually have a loss of disc space at your L5 S1 disc." It seems to be really common. I don't know why. It could be just kind of like a wear and tear type of thing, and it's just something that most people seem to have at some point. I've never had any imaging done on my neck or my back, but I'm sure I have something like that, and especially since I do get back pain myself. So. But when we're looking at any type of discopathy or a pathology with the disc, we're probably looking at a loss of imbibition, which is where imbibition is where the fluid of the disc has slowly started to evaporate or go away. And a lot of times this could be just regular day-to-day micro trauma, which means that just stuff that's happened to you throughout your day. It could be a sports injury that you didn't really think too much of at the time, or from a car accident, or because most of us at this point, if we're living in the modern world, have probably been in some sort of vehicle accident. And a lot of times even just a minor one will cause some sort of issue because there's a shearing force that occurs when that happens. And when that shearing force occurs, it damages the tissues lining around the disc. And the a disc is composed of two different types of tissues. There's an outer fibrous layer, and inside the disc there is a kind of like it's like a ball of viscous fluid, a little thicker than water. And when the outer fibers maybe tear through some sort of injury or something like that, that little ball of fluid starts to leak into those tissues. And as if there's any other further injury to it, that may actually start to protrude into the space where the nerve is. If it touches the nerve or causes inflammation around that nerve, that's when we may get things like pain, numbness, tingling down an arm or down a leg.
So that's a so-called slip disc.
Yeah, we don't really call it that anymore. We actually call it like a disc protrusion. Even disc bulge, protrusion, it tends to be the most commonly used word nowadays. There's protrusion. A bulge is maybe a little bit lighter, but a protrusion tends to be where it's really just kind of poking through, and it doesn't even necessarily have to touch the nerve. What can happen is it could create inflammatory reactions around it, where you get the build up the different cytokines and other inflammatory markers, and that can irritate the nerve and cause that pain, numbness, tingling running down it.
Okay. So if we're in that situation, and I think most long-term people involved in combat sports anyway, but probably any kind of sport or even games like golf, have probably had something like that. What are the next steps? What are the reasonable steps to take when we've got that, sciatica from that supposed? We're assuming it's a protrusion from the disc, say in the lumbar area, and shooting pain down the leg, or in the neck area, shooting pain down the arm. What are the next reasonable steps?
Well, I think if we've been treating for maybe about 4 to 6 weeks and you're just not improving, or the improvement's very slow, I think the next step is really to get some imaging on it. X-ray is not going to show too much. Really, the gold standard in any type of suspected disc protrusion is going to be an MRI. And that's usually going to give us the best image of what's going on. And what we want to do is take a measurement of it. Anything less than 4 millimeters, it's probably more of a biochemical reaction, an inflammatory reaction within the body, and it's probably not protruding. But I have seen some people.
It's probably not protruding onto the nerve.
Exactly.
It's the cytokines and stuff that you were talking about earlier.
Right. So if it's more than 4 millimeters, we need to look at that MRI a little deeper. And like I said, I've seen up to about 12 millimeters before, which is actually pretty extensive if it's really that bad. But if it's more than 4 millimeters, we have to make sure that it's not pressing down on that nerve too much. And also make sure it's not, depending on the level, it's not pushing it into the spinal cord. If we're getting it into the spinal cord or into the spinal canal, depending on what that looks like, then if it's bad enough, we need to make sure that it's not a medical emergency. So if we're looking at the neck, the neck. So from about C5 to T1, so that's about the middle of your neck to the very top of your upper back. That is a very important level for pretty much the arms and the hands and stuff like that, because that's where the brachial plexus emerges out of the spine and runs down into the fingers. So the interesting thing about the nervous system is when we're looking at it, if you're getting numbness and tingling running down in a very specific pattern, we can almost see which nerve root and in which nerve down your arm that could be. And depending on where it's coming from. Now, if you feel it's coming from the neck, and we look at the imaging, it's very consistent with your symptoms and orthopedic testing, stuff like that. neurological testing, then we know it's definitely coming from the neck. But sometimes you can get it from like the elbow or the wrist. Carpal tunnel syndrome being one of the most well-known issues in the wrist. Yeah, the favorite joke, just to get off subject a little bit, is when people say, "Oh yeah, I get carpal tunnel," and I say, "Well, I have 2 carpal tunnels." Carpal tunnel is just an anatomical fixture within your wrist where the median nerve runs through, and we all have carpal tunnels. Now, we don't all have carpal tunnel syndrome, which is what they usually mean by that. That's a long-winded explanation for a very simple joke, but when we're looking at that, though, when we're looking at that in terms of something going on in the neck and with a disc and a nerve, if it's not so bad, if it's a little bit more than 4 millimeters, it's probably okay to treat it. We may want to be just a little bit cautious in what we do. But as that gets worse, and if it starts pressing into the spinal canal, where it's maybe even putting some pressure on the spinal cord, this may be a little bit more of a medical emergency, and we may want to refer to a neurosurgeon to have them assess the patient. And this is something where, personally, in my own experience, as opposed to some other chiropractors who want to keep everything in-house and just kind of, I'm going to miraculously heal you with my hands, I'm a little bit more cautious in how I'm going to approach a patient. If I see something that's going to be a little bit more outside my wheelhouse, I have no problem referring them out or referring them for co-treatment. If I can do a little bit to help them, but maybe I need a neurosurgeon or an orthopedist to take a look at them, that might be a little bit better for that patient than me just saying, okay, I'm going to do it all. I find that to be very irresponsible when other chiropractors do that type of thing.
I think it's the same thing, exact same thing in the martial arts. If you're training with some dude who's really just been training with a gi for 20 years, and he's an expert in lapel guard and spider guard, and now you want to go compete in a no-gi tournament, he should actually be telling you to go train with somebody else. And I've respected my teachers so much more when they've said, I don't really know anything about that, but go train with this guy. That's made me much more loyal to the original person than if they'd pretended and tried to bullshit their way through it. And when you're dealing with somebody's spine, I think the onus, the amount of responsibility you have is even more greater. Obviously, it's a ton greater. Like you're dealing with that person's mobility and pain for the rest of their life, as opposed to some schmuck winning a medal. Yeah,
absolutely.
So now let's just talk about kind of the protruding disc thing. I'm not dealing with this right now, but I have friends who are, so I'll ask on their behalf. What's kind of the spectrum of treatment there, ranging from the conservative options to the surgical? And how do you decide when you go from a more conservative approach to actually getting somebody in there to carve your spine apart and put in some kind of metal plastic hybrid disc thing?
Yeah. I think it's time, and it's really the patient's ability to put in the effort to get the therapy done. But if we're looking at it, so the patient's coming in, if we start them off some basic adjunct or physical or physiotherapy modalities, that could be anywhere as simple as, ice and heat, electric stimulation, ultrasound therapy, soft tissue modalities like Graston, Theragun, things like that, or even, just having them, get some sort of regular massage through a therapeutic massage therapist, not your little hole in the wall massage therapy, masseuse parlor or something like that. But, someone who's got, some proper training and stuff.
I don't know if it's a Los Angeles thing, but massage parlor up here in Canada has a very different meaning from like therapeutic massage.
Yeah. I think we're on the same page in that. Yeah. But what we want to do is to make sure that the patient is getting that proper care initially, and if once we get into more imaging stuff like that, and if they're just not progressing very well, or maybe even the pain is getting worse, maybe the symptoms are getting worse, they're having issues with mobility, they've especially with low back pain, things like that, if they're having any loss of sensation within the legs or anything like that, then we want to get that surgical consult pretty quickly. And uh,
But surgeons always want to surgerize. I mean, I once had it's not really a spinal thing. I had a thoracic outlet syndrome issue. So that's when the nerves coming out of your neck basically get pinched. They go through
Right.
a hole in your shoulder.
Yeah.
And they get pinched. And we had a surgeon. My doctor sent me for a surgical consult, and the guy was talking about removing my first rib surgically.
Yeah.
And then I went and talked to a massage therapist friend of mine, and we fixed it in about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's like that surgeon was so fixated on have scalpel, we'll cut. Like they're talking like, shouldn't we be trying something else first before you're talking about like removing ribs from my body?
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned time is kind of the important thing. I really want patients to earn that surgery, if that makes sense. If
they've tried everything
when it
else.
comes down to it, everything has been done. Nothing is really making a dent in it, essentially. So then that surgery is the last final option. Because once you go surgery, you never go back. It's really the final option. I've had a couple surgeries. I know you've recently had a big surgery, and once that surgery happens, you never go back. Now, in the case, I heard that your hip surgery has actually been pretty well so far. So I know that's
Been
It's far better than it had any
experience.
right to be.
Right.
So, I mean, I think the key there was I tried many, many different things, including like Synvisc and Monovisc injections, which is a needle that's about 12 inches long. That's not the plunger at the end of the needle. That's just a needle. So they put that in mid thigh, and it goes into the hip. They use an ultrasound to do it. And that bought me probably 4 or 5 years. But the other thing I kept on hearing was, man, I had my hip surgery. I wish I'd had it earlier. And I was like, okay, I'm trying everything. It's getting worse. I can intersect the lot. What I was using as a metric was two things. It was my hip mobility and jiu-jitsu, which was going, my guard retention went for a major crap. And also the length of distance I could hike in the mountains. And like in 1 year, I went and watched it go from 50 kilometers to 30 kilometers to 20 kilometers. I'm like, okay, if I extrapolate this forward, in a couple of years, I'll be able to do 0. So why don't I get it done now while I still have muscle mass, while I still, the stabilizers are still functional, while I haven't started compensating by walking like a crippled person. And I think I luckily I timed it just right. I timed it. I was on the slope of inevitable decline, and I wasn't crippled, but I could see it. And at the same time, I still had the muscle mass to recover fairly quickly from it.
Right. Yeah. And I think it sounds to me like you really earned that. You waited long enough. You did as much as you could, both yourself and, both through less evasive, therapies, to get to that point where, okay, surgery is now the thing I need to do. Let's use that to prevent it from getting to a point where you can't use it at all.
And I think the other variable I had there going in my head was that a hip surgery, I mean, we can thank the baby boomers for getting all the kinks of hip replacement surgery out of the way, or most of them anyway. They've been doing this for 50 years. They're much better at it now than they used to be. The parts are better, the procedures are better, and so it's also not as scary as spinal surgery. Spinal surgery, I would be holding out a little bit longer. It's really terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Spinal surgery is kind of an interesting thing. I haven't seen if there's any change in the recent numbers, but I know even 5, 6, 7 years ago, they said that for back surgery, whether it's a fusion or disc replacement or anything like that, that your average time to failure of that surgery is about 5 years,
Wow.
where it's going to have to
Oh,
be redone. Yeah. So I think it's really important to really get that therapy in before you reach that surgery to fix it. And I tell people, when you're experiencing back pain for the first time ever, it means that something you're doing or not doing is contributing to it. And it may be just as simple as you're sitting too much, or you're not moving you're not moving around enough. And that could be just an easy fix of like going for a 20-minute walk every day, where they say that actually walking is what helps to correct the lumbo-pelvic rhythm. And it just goes to show that as we had evolved into bipedalism, or walking on upright on two legs, that our back is meant to have that consistent walking in it. And if we're not doing that enough, it's likely going to contribute to a loss of function and maybe even pain, injury down the road.
I've not had back surgery, but I have had a number of other surgeries, and walking has been my number one, number two, and number three therapy. Like, that's been my goal. Just get up and walk, get up and walk,
Yeah.
get up and
Yeah.
walk. And it's
Yeah.
worked fairly well. Now, I know that your approach to treating patients is rather different, or somewhat different from most chiropractors. Like, to go in, crack, okay, see you next week. That you do a lot more work on strengthening. So tell me about that. That's a kind of an unusual approach that I've not run into with too many chiropractors.
Yeah. So obviously my initial approach is very similar to most chiropractors, and maybe just get in, let's acute care, let's get that out of the way. We'll do some adjustments. Let's restore some motion into the certain segments that are maybe not moving so well. And then, as it's feeling better, once pain has gone away, once you're able to move, okay, now we really need to do the work of getting it stronger. I saw a study about 3 years ago in the Journal of Strength Conditioning out of the National Strength Conditioning Association, where they were highlighting um, what percentage of different modalities actually improves a patient's care. And a lot of times what people suggest is like, oh, maybe you just need to stretch it out. And you see that a lot. And when they looked at the actual research, the research showed that stretching really only helped about 6% of the time, which is not a lot. And, so you have 94% of the time, there's other things. Of that 94%, 69% was getting stronger and strength training, which to me is just like that, kind of like the light bulb went off in my head, and it made so much more sense of what I need to have patients start doing. So
you have to send me that article, and I will include a link to it on our podcast, because that's not, strength training isn't always the answer, but it's amazing how often it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And and I always tell people the body is very resilient. A lot of times, most people are going to recover pretty quickly, but if you're strengthening the body, and it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be lifting like a power lifter in the gym to get stronger. It could be just simple calisthenics you do every day. The body's ability to move in a wide range of motion with strength is what I define as mobility. And if you lose that ability to move, and you can be flexible, you can get down in the splits just fine, but you don't have the mobility to move into a good range of motion, that means that you lack that strength, even though you have the flexibility. And I think that's sometimes what also leads people to injury as well, is that they get really hypermobile. They're able to have too much range of motion, but not have the strength to control that range of motion.
There was a study done years ago, I think it was the US Army who did it, and they looked at injuries from running.
Mm-hmm.
And they looked at flexibility versus rate of running injuries, because they've got thousands and thousands and thousands of recruits they're putting through every year. So they obviously have the data. And they found that it was the least flexible and the most flexible that had the most injuries.
Mm-hmm.
And they probably just did a simple hamstring stretch test. I'm guessing that's how they measured all flexibility, which is a vast simplification, but still, that you could get injured if you were super tight, but you could also get injured if you were super flexible without having.
Right.
And your nuanced addition there would be super flexible without the strength to actually control yourself towards the end of that range of motion.
Yeah. Yeah, so, absolutely.
So if you're working with, let's say, a fairly young athletic person who's gone through back pain, we're not talking grandma here.
Yeah.
What kind of back strengthening exercises and modalities would you recommend? Would you be working on them with them on? And obviously that's specific, but just give us a range of examples. Would you be doing deadlifts with some people?
It depends on where they are in the treatment. If they came in initially with acute back pain, I may say, okay, let's take a break from doing deadlifts right now. Not that deadlifts are bad or anything like that. They're actually a fantastic exercise. Funny, I don't know if you've noticed about this, but an old term for deadlift used to actually be health lift.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it was just, the ability to pick up something from the ground, at some sort of relative heaviness was was a way to kind of show how healthy you were. And obviously we call them deadlifts now because it's dead weight as we lift it up. But we'll take a break from the deadlifts. And what I want to do is do some exercises that are going to be more corrective. And that we may look at their functional movement first and just kind of see how they're able to move in certain different movement patterns. I've always been a fan of Gray Cooks. He's a personal trainer out of Virginia or West Virginia. And he has 7 movement patterns that he uses to test.
Is that the functional movement screen?
Yeah, the functional movement screen, correct. And he uses that, and I've always really liked that. So I actually will use that with my patients, and I will take them through that, and I want to see where there might be a deficiency in asymmetry and movement, stuff like that. And then I will start to apply correctives based on what I see from there. Obviously, if they have pain in any movement, stuff like that, then we need to kind of back off and approach that a little bit differently. But if we're looking in terms of now we're strengthening the patient, we're going to do some corrective exercises. Now, for example, for low back, I may want to use like a bird dog. And it's kind of hard to explain, but a bird dog is where you're on all fours. So hands are down, knees are down, palms are down in alignment with the knees. And what you're going to do is you're going to take, for example, your right arm, stick it out in front of you, and your left leg behind you. And then you're going to bring them together. And there's a couple ways of doing it. You can touch your elbow to your knee, or you can touch the palm to the knee. And this helps to kind of correct the movement within the back, as well as to coordinate it a little bit better, so it starts to strengthen that. And then another one I like to use is a half Turkish Get Up, usually probably without weight at first. And so for people who don't know, a Turkish Get Up is where you're laying on your back supine, you have one knee up and then the same side arm is up on that. And the other leg is extended out, flat on the ground. And then the arm on that side. So my right side is the one being used. My right knee is up. My left arm is up, facing towards the ceiling. My left arm is kind of spread out in about a 45-degree angle from my body. And what I want to do is use that left side to push and reach up for the ceiling, even without a weight or anything like that. And this really helps to coordinate the core with the glutes and the hamstrings, and maintain spinal stability while we're doing that.
It's kind of the bastard child of bridging, side bridging, and technical get up or technical stand up in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. It's definitely that's one reason I like the Turkish Get Up as an exercise overall, is just because it has some correlation with jiu-jitsu and stuff like that, and it's just a great exercise.
As a longtime X-Guard player,
Mm-hmm.
And the number one sweep, the first thing you should always go for from X-Guard is essentially the stand-up sweep, which is basically the Turkish Get Up with a couple of tweaks. I feel fairly comfortable in saying it's like the jab of the X-Guard. If you don't know what you should be doing, you should be trying to go for the stand-up sweep.
Right.
Except it has a higher percentage of knockouts than the jab. It's like, imagine if the jab had the power of the cross. You'd be sitting there throwing the jab all day.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then obviously if people are in Glendale, California, they should come and have you take care of them. Yeah. But how do they find a good chiropractor? Because, I mean, honestly, the profession does have a reputation for woo. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of people who just reflexively go, chiropractors are quacks. And I've met good ones and I've met bad ones. So how do I find a good one?
Well, it's like anything. You should probably just interview. Ask the questions. Don't be afraid to ask those questions. Be like, so what do you do? How are you going to approach my, helping me to take care of my body? Am I just going to come in and you're just going to wham, bam, thank you, ma'am? Or are you really going to kind of set up a plan in which that, okay, this is what we're going to do for your acute care. This is what we're going to do to, move into more strengthening, stuff like that. So that's one way to go about it. The other thing is, you can learn a lot from a chiropractor's website. If you see things like, if it looks like, it's going to be kind of like a woo spiritual experience, then it's probably not something you're looking for, unless it is. But most likely people listening to your podcast are probably looking for something that's going to be more of something that's more practical and evidence-based or guided.
I probably have done a fairly good job of driving away any aspect of either woo-anon or Q-anon in the last 2 years, except people who hate listening. Right? I'm sure there's somebody listening going, I hate this guy so much. But okay, so be on the lookout for that. I once went to a chiropractor who practiced, because he came super highly recommended by somebody who I really liked, and later learned that every single recommendation that they ever made was just terrible. There are people that you can really like and really respect, who just make terrible referrals. So this dude would take an x-ray of your back. He had his own x-ray machine. Okay, that's kind of cool. Like, I don't know if I needed those extra microsieverts, but I've now been exposed to a little bit more radiation. And then he would practice touchless adjustments. He'd basically put his thumbs very, very gently on your neck, and then there'd be clunk, clunk. And I looked at him and like, that was your shoulder blades that was cracking. And he was like, sometimes the energetic feedback just sends the energy that I'm sending into your neck back into my body. So that was his trick, right? His party trick is he could crack his own shoulder blades. And yeah, I only did I ever go back? No, I don't think I went back. I think that was it. In my version of the story, I never went back. The truth is, I
Yeah.
might have gone back a second time because I was
Yeah.
um, determined to try out this amazing guy, and it made
Yeah.
no difference
Yeah.
at all.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are hundreds of chiropractic, quote unquote techniques. The most common nowadays used is what we call diversified. It's really just kind of manual manipulation that may generate a sound or what we call it. Most people call a crack or a snap or a pop.
In the
It's like
patient's body, not in the chiropractor's body.
yes, in the patient's body. Um, there's been an occasion where I've felt it done to myself as I'm adjusting a patient, and they go, "Oh well, you adjusted yourself too." It happens, but it's obviously that is not me trying to trick the patient into believing that I just did something to them. Um, but obviously that can occur. And when people ask me what it is, I usually tell them, "Well, we don't actually know for sure." I'm going to be the honest chiropractor here and tell people that. Some people will say, "Oh, well, I'm moving your bones or moving, yeah, probably not." And a lot of times it's probably more soft tissue related than it is actually related to the joints themselves, even though there is some evidence showing that it may be a release of gas pressure within the joint capsules. But I think the jury's still kind of out on that moment. But, that being said, when you're looking for a chiropractor who does a certain technique or anything like that, or you're just looking for a chiropractor who may just use that as part of one of his modalities in treating you, usually they'll say, "Oh, I do diversified technique," or one that's similar is probably Gonstead, which is created by I forget his first name is Dr. Gonstead back in the 1950s. It's got a decent technique. Unfortunately, a lot of times they tend to be woo type of chiropractors themselves. So, and they tend to overexpose people to radiation through full spine X-rays when it's probably not necessary. Um, and then another one that actually does have a fair amount of research behind it is Activator Technique, and that's when you actually use a tool that does the adjustment as opposed to just doing it with a manual hand adjustment.
Okay. So, I'm assuming that if you get a sense of woo, or you get a sense of, that this doesn't seem to make any sense, you should probably just leave.
Yeah, it's probably a good idea. I mean, it depends. Every doctor is going to be a little bit different. Some may have a really good um, scientific basis or some sort of evidence based approach to it, but still have a little bit of that aspect in them. There's so much variation within the profession that you're going to run into a little bit of it no matter what. Take everything with a grain of salt. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, which is a lesson I learned very young from my mother.
Yeah.
But it's best to just kind of use your own logic and reasoning ability to judge whether something's going to be effective for you.
Okay. All right, Troy. How do people find you if they're not close to you for getting treatment? How do people find you on social media to follow the stuff that you're putting out?
You can find me on Facebook and Instagram. You Google my name; it'll probably come up. I think Facebook is Dr. Schott DC. And I'm sure once you post this, they'll have the correct spelling of my name. But it's my last name is Schott, Schott.
A good squarehead name.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting name because it was, I guess, it was shortened during World War II by my father's side of the family. It was Schottenhausen.
Okay.
Yeah, which I guess if you translate it one way, we have no idea what it means, but if you translate that one way, it means like House of Scots or something like that. I have a suspicion that we were part of the Scottish migration from Scotland to the Germanic area back in, I think, what it was at the 1500s or something like that.
Who knows?
Just go with it.
But
Just go with it.
Yeah, I'm going with it. Yeah, yeah. Maybe I'm royalty in Scotland. I don't know.
Well, just go there and demand the throne.
Exactly.
And what's your website then?
It's shotchiropractic.com. So just my last name, chiropractic.com.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. I think that was a very practical and very no-nonsense approach to sort of an introduction to back health and the importance of strengthening it and trying different things before you jump immediately to surgery. And I think that's always a good idea. So thanks so much. Good luck with your practice.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. You as well.